Okay, it's 3:01, so we're going to go ahead and get started today. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining our class on Unity. My name is Jessica, and I'm an LSR, a Library Services Representative with the Plano Public Library. Online, we're also joined by Yuna, who is available to troubleshoot technical difficulties and who will be moderating any questions we may get in the chat. Before we begin, I'm going to let you know a few ground rules that we've set up for today's program. All of our virtual attendees are going to be muted. That's you. And video is blocked from you guys as well. During the program, you're only going to see my screen. At the top of the screen, you can find an exit full screen option if you need to get to other things on your computer. You're welcome to ask questions or request that I repeat information at any time during today's program. You can use the chat or Q&A features available in Zoom. You should see icons at the bottom of your screen for those features. We're going to repeat all the questions that we receive, so everyone has the context of that question before we move on. A recording of this program will also be available in a few days on our YouTube channel if you want to go back and look at things again. There we go. This is Unity Basics. We're going to learn the basics of Unity software to get started on making video games. Today's goal for the class is just to explore using Unity. We're first going to explain what Unity is, and then we'll outline some terminology and go through a short demonstration. So what is Unity? Unity is a game engine, which is a code-based software designed to make video games. There are lots of different game engines available, each with different strengths. Unity is a great tool for a wide variety of video games and is used by both individuals and hobbyists. It's also a popular choice for commercial games, from one-person startup indie games to multi-million-dollar AAA games. While it is possible to make a game without a game engine, using an engine like Unity makes the process way easier by simplifying or eliminating some of the work the game designer would need to do otherwise. For example, portability. Without a game engine, a lot of work is needed to make a game that works on Windows computers, Apple computers, gaming consoles, and smartphones all together. There'd be a lot of code involved to make each specific version. Unity has some export functions that make it possible to make the same game playable in all of those places with relatively little work. Another thing that a game engine helps make easier is visualization. Without a game engine, the game designer would need to work with lines of code, wait for the code to compile, which if the game gets pretty big, starts to take a long time, hours. And then they'd have to actually run the game each time they wanted to see how a change looked or worked. This makes checking for mistakes very time consuming and tedious. Unity lets you see what the game looks like as it's made, so you can see changes in real time and run the game in a test mode that checks how things work without waiting for the game to compile. So it makes iteration on mistakes way easier, and you can see what's happening instead of having to wait for a long time between each check. Ultimately, the game engine is doing a lot of background programming to make games run easily and make it easier for a person to work on the game. So some system requirements. Unity updates regularly. To use the most recent version of Unity, you may need a more powerful computer than if you were to try to run an older version. Older versions are still available for download from the Unity website. So if the current version has system requirements that are a little bit too high for your setup, try an older version and see if that runs a little bit better. To make things with Unity right now, you'll need a Mac OS of 10.15 or up. Windows 7 computers can run Unity. Windows 10 can also. 2 gigabytes of RAM at least is required. 4 or more is recommended. RAM helps things load faster while you're both working on the game and then running the game later. As long as your computer is a 64-bit computer, it should be able to run some version of Unity. Okay. Purposes and uses. Unity is mostly used to make games. It is a popular choice for this because it can support a lot of different types of games, has a lot of existing tools and tutorials, and is free for student and personal use. It only has a commercial cost if the user or their company has made over $100,000 in revenue or fundraising in the last year as of this March. Because it is popular, it also has many resources and assets that you can add to your games, both free and paid, which just further boosts its popularity. Unity can also be used to aid in the production of animated videos, but we will be focusing on the video game development capabilities at this time. It's just good to know that Unity can also be used to help with animation. Some tools and vocabulary. There are just a few things we want to go over just to help make the rest of this program a little bit more clear. Because I'll be saying these words pretty frequently during the demo portion. The first one is a scene. A scene is a level or everything that's loaded at the same time while you would play your game. If a game is small, the scene could contain the entire game. If a game is bigger, a scene would be one level or area. When you're making a game, you'll work one scene at a time. You can only load one scene at a time while you're working with Unity. Assets are the resources that go into the game. 3D models, 2D images, audio, video files, etc. They are everything that goes into the game. The environment, the sound, items, players, programming, everything that goes into it. And then you can make assets move or interact with each other using scripts, which are little bits of programming that tell different parts of the game how to interact with each other or the player. In Unity, scripts are usually written in the C# language. Scripts tell objects in the game how to interact with each other and with player input, how to respond to that. When you go to make a game, you need to decide if you're making a 2D or 3D game, since those games are going to have different types of requirements. And you choose, when you make a Unity project, you choose 2D or 3D from the start. For 2D games, assets are made from pixel-based images. Visual assets and animations almost always are made outside of Unity, usually in a digital art software like Photoshop, GIMP, Clip Studio, or even Microsoft Paint. It's just flat. There is no 3D space. There's only left, right, up, down. There is no in or out. With 3D, a 3D game uses polygon-based models. These are often made outside of Unity as well, using software like Maya or Blender, but Unity can create some simple models for you. Animation of these models can also be done within Unity. So 2D animations usually done outside. 3D animations can be handled by Unity itself. Some games use a combination of 2D and 3D to achieve specific graphical effects or to make in-game animation or processing easier, because 3D animations can be done, but 2D may not necessarily be able to. Sometimes they use like a 3D model, and then by animating the 3D object, they're able to make it look like 2D animation has happened. It's possible to convert a 2D game into a 3D game and vice versa, but the earlier you make a final decision, the less work has to be redone. It is often recommended to wait to make your final assets and use placeholder ones until you know how your game is going to play. Creating a level with very simple assets before inserting final assets. It's called white boxing, and it helps to reduce unnecessary work from creating assets you don't actually need. Are there any questions so far before we head into the demo of Unity?
There is only one question asking, do we have to download the Unity ourselves? That's the only one question.
Yes, so if we're going to show what Unity looks like now, one of the more recent versions of Unity. Unity is free and you're able to download it on your own computer. If you wanted to try Unity out, we do also have Unity installed on the DCS computers at our digital creation spaces at the Harrington, Haggard, and Parr libraries. But to actually, if you wanted to use it on your computer, you would have to download it, yes. Okay, now I need to get out of, no, Not there. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and switch into the demo. Now, we already have Unity installed on this computer. So I've gone ahead and clicked on the shortcut and it's pulled up the Unity Hub. And within the Unity Hub, we're able to hit New Project. And then it'll give us a list of options for our project. 3D is the default. And we're going to use this template for our demonstration. But everything that we're doing in the 3D environment can be done in the 2D as well. We will also be looking at this 2D platformer micro game later, which is basically a sample game that Unity has included with the download. So we'll be able to look at some more complex things. But we're going to go ahead and click on 3D, and then we're going to name our project. Let's see, this is Unity Basics. So make sure it saves where you want it to, and then create project. Then we're going to wait for it to load for a second. The first time you may open up a Unity project, it can take a little bit longer for everything to get loaded in. But then once it's done the first time, it loads much faster the next couple of times. So I'm gonna bring this screen over. It loaded on the other monitor, so give me 1 second while it finishes processing, then I'll move it over. There we go. All right. So this is, full screen that. This is the workspace. This is the default setup for various windows in the Unity workspace. Starting from the left over here, we have the hierarchy, which this is a list of all of the objects that are in the game. Objects here, they can be grouped together. We'll show how to do that a little bit later. The scene window is this big, you can see my mouse, right? You know, are we able to see the mouse?
Yes, I see.
Awesome. Okay, the scene is the window that is displaying the game. It gives a game preview. If you hit the play button at the top, it will start running the game. And then if you hit pause, it will pause the game. And that the game will continue to be like actively on until it is fully stopped, which I believe the play button turns into a one of the square stop buttons. If you hit the if you make any changes while the game is running, those changes don't save. So if you want to make any, it's good for like testing to see if something will work. But if you want what changes you're making to save, you do want to make sure that the play button is there, which means your game isn't running. The inspector is on the right-hand side. It's empty right now, but once we put some things in the game, we'll be able to click on those objects and see some extra information about the objects that are in the game. And then project is down here at the bottom, and that shows everything that has been imported into or created in the project. And they pre-do a bunch of packages that you're able to use. And then everything that's down here can be dragged directly into the scene, just a drag and drop. From here, we're going to quickly go through the menus that are at the top of the screen and the useful options in those menus. So we got the file, which includes new scene and new project options. As we discussed before, the scene is a level. If you want to add a new scene, you're able to do that here. you want a new scene for each level in your game. If it's once it's past a certain size, you can also create a separate scene for things like the title screen, option menu, credits. There can and often are multiple scenes in a game. Separating the game into separate scenes prevents the game from having to load a bunch of information objects that you aren't using, which could make the game run very slowly, especially on old computers. Dividing up discrete chunks of the game into different scenes helps games run better later. And also, if your computer that you're making the game on isn't that strong, breaking things up into different scenes can make it easier for you to make the game as well. Because past a certain point, it takes a little while to load. A new project is a whole new game. You can't have multiple games in the same game. Or if you did, you would actually do that by making new scenes. A new project would mean starting from scratch. And then you also want to make sure you're saving frequently. You're able to save the whole scene or just one part of the hierarchy, which right click here. Okay, we don't have anything that lets us pop in all the way down to save just that yet, because everything is scene level right now. Under the next menu, we have the edit as the standard copy, cut, paste. Lets you take something that you've already done and put it somewhere else, either by removing it from the first place and just moving it over, or making a copy. In Unity, the cut does not remove the original thing until it's been pasted somewhere else. Otherwise, it works exactly as you would expect copy, cut, and paste to work. Assets is the next tab here. Assets are the things that are in your game. Everything you see or hear in the game is an asset. So you're able to, you can make a new folder by right-clicking in our project, hit new folder, things, and then if we go into there, asset, create, and you're able to pick a bunch of different types of assets to add to your game. So one thing, it can also be imported using this menu here, the import new asset option. There's also some default assets that we can add, such as, where is it? Where did it go? Okay. There's 2D. Where's my shapes? Oh, they're in game objects. I'm silly. So when you actually creating an asset is creating the version, it's like importing it into the project, and then game object is creating an instance of that, which means that if we're going to add 3D objects, we do it from the game object menu. My bad. Materials is another asset that can be made. It's like, they can sometimes be called textures, and they can be added to other assets or objects to make them look a certain way. They can be solid colors or an image file that's added to a different object. Using materials when you're working with placeholder shapes can help you keep track of what's happening on the screen. Like if you can make a blue material, say, change the color here, make it blue. And now we have a little blue material that we'll be able to apply to a shape that we make later. Okay. One type of asset that doesn't necessarily have a visual or audio component is the C# scripts. They're imported into the game the same way as other assets, and they can be created within Unity. Creating a script from scratch is programming, though, and it is outside the scope of this class. When we look at that Unity sample game later, we'll be able to look at some existing scripts there. But we'll go ahead and make another material that will help us later. Materials. For getting additional assets, you're able to buy or download free assets to add to your game in the Unity store. Unity store assets are usually free for personal commercial use. If you purchase an asset from a different storefront, you may want to check and see what uses are permitted. And if you plan on actually releasing the game, some asset packs have different crediting requirements. So you'd have to put the name of the pack or the name of the creator in the credits, or they can't be used in specific type of projects. And sometimes, so you just want to check and make sure that wherever you get your 3D objects or your other assets, you have permission to use them. Okay. Are there any questions so far? We're about to get into the game objects and adding things to this actual scene here.
There is only one other question, and it says, is there anyone at Haggard Library who can answer questions if I try Unity there?
I don't know that we have any specific experts on it, but they should be able to help you with some basic setup and navigation at least. And we are, towards the end of the program, we are going to post some links to some online classes that you have access to with your library card that will, a lot of Unity tutorials will like walk you through making a game. So we will be giving out some assistance for that as well. But anyone at Haggard Library should at least be able to get you set up to this screen so you're able to mess around with Unity. Okay. So game objects. Game objects are also the things that are in your game. They are just specific copies of the assets. The asset is something you can use. The game object is an instance, a copy of that asset. There can be multiple copies of a single asset, and each copy is its own game object. And then this menu here, the game object, lets you add those objects to your game. So if we go to game object, 3D object, it gives us a list of possible shapes that we can add to the game. Cube is a nice one to start with. Now we have a cube. Once we insert the cube, we can see the cube in the scene window. Sometimes it's made in a place that's a little weird. This time it put it on the floor, but sometimes if you're like looking in a specific direction, it'll just put the cube in the space somewhere in front of you. So it's good to be able to move around and change how you're viewing things. So if you're too far away, like we were before, I use the scroll wheel to zoom in and zoom out. If you click and move the mouse, oh, that's regular click. Regular click doesn't do much. If you're not selected anything, a regular click will select that object. You'll see the inspector is filled with information about the cube. It's more complicated than you'd expect a cube to be, but it's there. And then if you right click and move the mouse, that's how we're pivoting from the viewpoint there. And then if you're trying to look at a specific object, you can select it using the mouse, or in the hierarchy window, you're able to click on it here, and then game object, align view to selected puts you inside the object. So like I am inside the cube. So if you've lost something in your space, you can use that to help find where that went, and then reorient yourself basically. Now that we have this object, say we've found it after the Unity put it in a weird place, but we don't want it where they put it. We want to move it around. So there's a couple of different ways you can transform objects in your Unity scene. The first one is they're all going to be up here by the scene name. So we've got the move tool, which will let you grab the object and move it around in the space. So we're able to slide it along any of these three axes, the X, the Y, and the Z. You can also click, there's a plane here, which is, so instead of just moving it front or back, it is able to go like up and down, but it stays on the grid, it stays aligned to that one axis that it's on. The rotate tool is next to the move tool. It gives you these little curved lines, and then you're able to rotate them by grabbing one and sliding it over. These are all just regular clicks. I'm not right-clicking or anything. You're able to rotate along the X, Y, or Z axis. And then next to the rotate tool, we have the scale tool. If we've decided we don't like how big this cube is, we can make it smaller or bigger. If you grab the cube in the center, it will adjust the whole thing proportionally, as opposed to grabbing one, which just adjusts its width, height, or depth. All of these transformations, if you've been looking at the inspector over here, these numbers are now really weird because I've messed with where it is and then how much it's been rotated and the scale. So you're able to, like if we wanted it exactly 45 degrees, then we could do 45 and 45. And now it's like perfectly 45 degrees up from the X axis. Or if we want the scale, if we want one side to be exactly two times as long as the other one, we're able to do that in the inspector as well. So that's for more precise movements. Sometimes you've like gotten something almost where it needs to be, and you need it just a little bit further over. You need it to perfectly align with a different shape. And the inspector can help get you that precise level of control. The objects can also be copied and pasted, as we mentioned before. This can be done, it's selected. We can tell by the orange line, so I've clicked, and then asset, copy, and then edit, paste. Now it says there's two cubes. Where's the second cube? It looks like it's in the same spot. So if I click here and I move it, there's now two 3D shapes. And then now these cubes look really similar. I'd like to be able to tell them apart. So we have these two materials here. There's a couple ways we can add a material to a shape. So if we go down to the mesh renderer, there's a materials drop down here. We're able to change the default material to, where's our one we made? It's blue now. So we're able to change the material there in the mesh renderer, or a little simpler, if you have it pulled up in your project window down at the bottom, you can click and drag and change it that way as well. If you are able to add a game camera from the game object as well, but there is a default one when you make a new project like we did. So the only time you would need to add a camera is if you accidentally delete that somehow, or if you make a new scene and it doesn't have anything in it at all. Or sometimes you want to have two different cameras that you switch between, but that's, you can. Okay. All right. And then if we want to move these things together, we can do that over in the hierarchy here by grouping them together. We can right click, create empty, and now there's an empty game object, cubes, and we can click and drag those into, and put the cubes in cube. So now if I wanted to move them, I can click on cubes, and they've both been selected. You can see the line around both of them, and we can move them both at the same time. Okay. So these two don't touch. These two cubes aren't touching each other, but they can also be used on objects that have been put close together and are actually touching to make it, it's just all of the objects in that folder will move at the same time. Any questions about the transformations, the physical objects in the game so far?
We have two questions.
Mm-hmm.
The first question is, does it need a coding skills? That's the first question.
Mm-hmm.
And the second question is how do you make a material?
How do I make material? Okay, we can definitely make another material real fast. But first, with regards to coding, It helps to understand how programming works to make scripts. But that said, just like there's a lot of different like 3D assets out there, there are also a lot of different pre-existing scripts that you're able to either buy or borrow. The micro game that we look at later is going to have some scripts that Unity has just given you with your download. So while it is definitely helpful to understand some programming and be able to program a little to make your scripts, it's not strictly necessary. A lot of people do create pre-existing scripts to help with different types of games. Like if there's a match 3 puzzle, there are probably game script sets out there that might be used that you would be able to download or buy to be able to make that type of game. So it's useful to be able to, but you don't necessarily have to. And a lot of times if you follow tutorials, they will include asset packs to download that to give you to mess with scripts while you're making the game. And then for making new materials, we did that from the game object tab. Wait, right? No, we did that in assets. So asset, create, and then we dropped down to material. So asset, create, material. A new one popped up into the folder that we had open on the project down there. And then I changed the color for it because its default is white by clicking on this white bar here because that's the default color. We'll make a red one this time. We'll make this one, opaque is fine. We'll make it metallic. Why not? We'll see how that looks later. I'll add a new shape and see how that looks. Game object, 3D object, cube, new cube. Let's make it big and flat so that I can use it for the lighting bit we're about to go through. There we go. Now we have a floor. Delightful. And then we'll apply this material. There's 2 ways to do it, either by clicking on the object and adding it to the mesh renderer or just by dragging and dropping. Okay. So now we can go ahead and go into lighting. Now there's a couple of different types of lights that can be added to the game. I'm gonna get this closer to there. There is a default directional light that is inserted into the game. If we select it in the hierarchy, we can look at the different options that are associated with the directional light. You can adjust the color of the light, how strong it is. Its intensity by default is 1. You can address the tone, how strong it is, the light, its rotation. Let's see. So if we rotate we'll do that here. If we rotate this directional light, we can see that it's like the sun is moving, time of day is changing, and you can see how the shadows change in relation to that. So that again was inserted into the scene by default, but you can add a directional light by going into game object and then light. Directional light's that top option. There are a couple of different types of light that can be used. For example, the point light. We've now created a point light. I'm going to move this down into the shadow. Let's see. Let's get a little closer. That's way down there. I need it above 0. Are you in this space yet? There we are. I found it. Now we've got this point light. And basically what a point light is, it is a localized light. It leaves from a specific point. We've got it selected. It has some similar changes that you can make to the directional light. For example, the color, we can change the color of this light. Now it's a blue light, purple light. You can change the intensity. Let's make it 10 times as strong. Oh, that's bright. So we can change how strong that light is. We'll put that back to 1 so that we can work with the other third type of light that we're going to discuss right now, which is the spotlight. Get up here. Where are you? There we are. Okay. Okay, so you can see that little faint circle that is happening under the spotlight. That's because it's very similar. The spotlight is very similar to the point light, but it's like you've stuck it in a cone. If we increase the angle, which was a slider that wasn't on the point light because it's everywhere, we can adjust how narrow or wide the spotlight is. Once again, you can change the intensity or the color or the rotation. So we can like aim it over there so that we can see the different types. Now it's all angled. Instead of just a perfect circle, it's become like if you aim a flashlight at the ground, but you're not aiming it directly down. Okay, these three lights are the most useful when you're starting out with Unity. There is another type of light, which is the area light, which is kind of just another localized light source. Okay, any question on lighting?
We have no question.
Okay. Got one more thing to talk about before we move on to the micro game. This is the component tab over here. This lets us add things to objects that we have selected already. So a lot of different things you can add. For example, effects, textures, scripts. Oftentimes, like if you make, like when we made the blank object, the create empty, it had nothing over here in the inspector, whereas the cube came with some stuff. So usually when you like insert a 3D object or something, it's going to come with most of the components it needs, but sometimes you want to change that or you need to add something like a script that you didn't have when you were initially inserted the asset, and you can add that to the object by selecting it in the hierarchy and hitting component. Okay, we're about to go into the micro game that was created by Unity to mess around with a more complex example. Any final questions about the general editor before we move on? I'm going to go ahead and start opening this.
We have no questions.
Okay. There we go. Now we're going to open this one. This one should be the test project. And you're seeing this load way faster because I did it ahead of time. Okay, let me move it over here again. So this micro game comes with tutorials pre-built in. So even if you don't, we're going to give you some access to Udemy and LinkedIn Learning tutorials that you have access to with your library card. But Unity does come with both a 2D and a 3D game that has a built-in tutorial about like how to add things, how to mess with a script, things like that. So we don't have time to go through this whole tutorial today, but know it exists. Okay. This microgame has a lot of things already in it. It's essentially a very small playable game. If we hit the play button at the top here, you're going to see the game start. And you can run around as the little player character. The enemies have animations. I can jump. I don't know if you can hear it, but there is sound. So I've hit the play button again to stop it entirely, and it went back out to that initial view. If I had just paused it, then any of the changes we're going to make wouldn't have applied. Okay. Let's see. So Unity scripts can be adjusted in the inspector view. So I'm going to go ahead and click on our player character and see what the scripts are. So someone has made a programming script called player controller. And because of the way that that script was set up, it gives us a bunch of little things that we can mess with easily graphically. So again, if you don't have any existing programming knowledge, you do not necessarily even have to look at the scripts. because like this script exists already, and we can change things like how fast they can go. They were kind of slow before. Let's make them like 4 times as fast. Now we've changed that speed. That got changed. So we'll hit the play button and we'll see how that changed the game. He's way faster now. I didn't have time to stop before running into the enemy. Then we can, his jump was pretty low before. Can we just adjust the jump height here? I think the gravity modifier would be how we change that. Let's make gravity not as strong. And we'll see what happens there. So it looks like we can jump a little bit higher there. If the player has a material, that changes how it looks, right? No, he doesn't. Let's give him a new look. Where did it go? Oh, this is a new project. Never mind. We can add a new create a new material and change the color. Make him purple. Why not? And then we can drag and drop. Oh, where'd he go? There's a lot going on there. So we'll just go to the player, and it should be a there he is. This one actually has a different 2D thing set up. So we can change his color there instead. So because it's using sprites instead of just using a material, it is a little bit different. Okay. And then we can see all the different game objects over here. We can change most of them in the way that we discussed before, including things like scale. We can make player character really big. Let's see. And then it doesn't just have to be the player that could be changed. The enemies can also be made different. So we got this big one here. And then there are multiple enemies in this environment, as we can see. There's another one there. I only clicked on this one enemy, which means that that was the only enemy that became larger. The base asset for the enemy hasn't changed. So you've just changed the one game object. Yeah, there's a lot of different things that can be done to mess with the environment. Are there any final questions before we go back to the PowerPoint and I send you on your way with some learning resources?
We have no other questions.
All right. Go ahead and open this PowerPoint back up. Let's see. Oh, okay. Well, there we go. Got some additional resources. So the Unity website has an extensive amount of tutorials and other documentation regarding how to use Unity. If you run into a problem with your specific version of Unity that you decide to use, there are forums there where people are able to ask their questions to get support from Unity itself. And then we also, through the library, with your library card, you're able to get able to use LinkedIn Learning, of which there are several courses. This is not a complete list, but there's different, I believe all 3 of these courses are multi-video tutorials that break down how to make a specific part of a game, or in the case of that second one, building an entire game. And then we also have access to Udemy, which is a very similar online learning platform that you have access to with your library card, which includes, has tutorials for Unity as well. And then if I can pull up the chat real quick, I can post a link to our research and learn page to make sure everyone has access to that. Research and learn page has links to both the LinkedIn Learning courses and then Udemy. And then I'll put a link to unity.com so you're able to get download the software and also access all those tutorials that they have. Are there any final questions?
Yeah, we have one last question.
Yes.
It says, what about the graphics in the game?
For making the graphics? So for creating Unity assets, if you're making a 3D game, then you could use a software like Maya or Blender to make 3D models. Additionally, the Unity website does have access to a Unity store where people are able to put assets that you can either use for free or that you can buy to put into your game. With 2D assets, that can be, you can have a lot of different file types for 2D assets. So JPEGs, PNGs, things like that. And you can make those in just about in a lot of different visual editing softwares, Photoshop, GIMP, Clip Studio Paint, even Microsoft Paint if you wanted to.
And we have some more questions here.
Yes.
Okay, so another question is how do you access LinkedIn courses with your card, online or at the library in person?
You are able to do it from home. So what you'll do, this is why I linked the research and learn page. You'll want to follow the link to LinkedIn Learning from that page. And then it will ask for your library card login. So you'll need your library card number and your PIN. And once you have done that, you'll have access to the LinkedIn courses, and you're able to search from there for the specific type of class you want.
Okay, and the next question is, if we were to make cutscenes, how would that be added into the game through Unity?
To make what?
Cut, C-U-T-S-C-E-N-E-S, cut scenes, meaning I think the short scenes, yeah.
So videos, okay. So you can have videos as an asset type. I think I still got this pulled up. Let's see. Game object, assets, import asset. And then you're able to just go and find the file that you need. So you would find your video file and then you would import it that way. That would be if it was a pre-existing video file. For making, like if you're using Unity to do your animation, then you would basically create all of the pieces that you would need in Unity. So you'd have to either import your assets or make your own for like the characters that are going to be animated. And then you would use Unity's built-in animation system to animate the models there.
Okay, and then we have another question. It says, so we can make like a map in the game by Unity.
You could, yes. So if you were to, if you're looking, so you could make that out of like 3D models. I know there are scripts that exist that like basically do a really far out view of the level to give you like a map that way. There's a lot of different ways you could implement a map. And getting into the specifics of one method or another, you'd probably want to find a specific tutorial to help you out with that, which again, Udemy, LinkedIn Learning. There's also a number of YouTube channels that do Unity tutorials. With all these softwares, you probably want to make sure that the version of Unity that you use to follow the tutorial is pretty similar, because Unity has gained and adjusted lots of features as it updates. So if you're watching a tutorial from 5 or 6 years ago, they may use options that are not the best options now, or they may, if you're using like a really old version of Unity and it's a brand new tutorial, they may be using features you don't have. So that is something to keep in mind as well.
That was the last question.
That was the last question. All right.
Oh, mhm.
Okay, then we will just wait a little bit to give people some time to make sure they grab their links. Thank you all for coming. We're so happy with how many of you guys turned out. I hope that this was a interesting first step into checking out Unity and that you're able to go and learn even more.